Ryan Mercer had barely finished unpacking the last moving box when he noticed the old crooked mailbox at the edge of his new property, leaning like it had been punched by years of wind and neglect. It stood about 2 feet from the cracked street curb, wedged into a patch of brittle weeds that barely passed for a lawn divider. With a cordless drill and a quick YouTube tutorial, he unbolted the dented post and shifted the whole setup 15 feet inward, closer to his newly poured gravel driveway. It took him 40 minutes. He didn't know it would spark a war. The sun hadn't even set. When he heard the squeal of tires outside, a white Lexus SUV swerved to a stop in front of his house. Out stepped a woman in wedge sandals, a beige sun hat, and oversized sunglasses. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a country club brochure, minus the friendliness. Clutched. In her hand was a clipboard, a red pen, and a phone already recording. "You can't do that," she snapped, marching onto his gravel. "That mailbox is regulated by the HOA. Ryan blinked. "Good evening to you too." She didn't smile. "I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Cedar Glen Estates HOA. And you just violated Regulation 1-C, subsection 3. Ryan glanced at the repositioned mailbox now standing straight and secure next to his driveway. "I moved it a few feet. Still on my property." Karen stepped closer. Too close. "This area falls under HOA easement zoning. You can't just move things without board approval." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Easement? I haven't seen any documentation of that." Karen smirked and clicked her pen dramatically. "You will." Without another word, she began snapping pictures of the mailbox from every angle, even lying down on the street to get a low shot like some kind of crime scene investigator. Then she turned around, flicked open her phone, and began filming her own driveway and side yard next door. "Just documenting the incursion," she muttered to herself. He moved the marker. "It's way off the line." Ryan stood frozen on his porch. Something felt off. Too much heat for something so minor. This wasn't just about the mailbox. She wasn't yelling because he'd moved it. She was nervous. "Is there an issue with the property line?" he asked carefully, stepping down toward her. She stopped recording and stiffened. "You're new here, Mr. Mercer. I'd recommend you get acquainted with the rules before you start making changes. This is a well-organized community. We don't just do things." He nodded slowly. "Got it." Karen stormed back to her SUV and drove off in a blur of dust and entitlement. Later that evening, Ryan searched through his deed and property layout. Nothing suggested an HOA easement anywhere near where the mailbox had stood. The space belonged to him fully, so why was she so rattled? The next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to his door. "Official HOA violation, unauthorized structural relocation." A fine of $500 was listed at the bottom. Karen's signature was printed in bold red ink across the center, and just beneath it, written in sharp handwriting, "Next time, we'll let the police handle it." Ryan stared at the words. His pulse tightened. This wasn't about a mailbox. It never was. Ryan didn't think she'd actually do it. A fine, sure. He expected more angry notes taped to the door. Maybe a passive-aggressive lawn sign or two. But the cops. That was bold. It happened 3 days after the fine notice. Ryan was repainting his porch steps when a black and white sheriff's cruiser rolled up to the curb. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out, their expressions unreadable. "Mr. Ryan Mercer?" the older one asked. Ryan stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Yeah, what's this about?" The younger deputy gave a half-apologetic smile. "We're responding to a call made by your HOA, apparently. There's been a complaint about you tampering with regulated infrastructure and violating community zoning." Ryan blinked. "You mean the mailbox?" The deputy glanced at his clipboard. "That's the one." "Unbelievable," Ryan muttered. "It's my property." The older deputy nodded. "Mind if we take a look?" Ryan led them down the gravel path to the nostrate mailbox. He explained how he'd simply moved it closer to the driveway, showed them his deed map, and even offered to pull up the satellite view from Google Earth. The officers looked at each other, then back at him. "Look," the older one said, lowering his voice, "we're not code enforcement. And this isn't federal mail fraud, so we're not pressing anything. But technically, if the HOA has regulations filed with the county and they're being enforced, you could end up in civil court." Ryan felt a slow, burning frustration coil in his chest. "This is harassment." The younger officer shrugged. "Honestly, wouldn't be the first HOA to abuse its power. But we have to respond if they call us." As the cruiser pulled away, Ryan noticed something odd. Survey stakes had been hammered into the grass near the mailbox. Small neon flags fluttered in the wind, most of them leaning toward his driveway. Almost like someone was trying to shift the boundary of the land. His stomach dropped. He hadn't placed those. He scanned the lawn, then walked toward the edge of the property line, footprints, faint but visible. A shallow tread pattern, like someone had circled the spot multiple times. He knelt down. They weren't his boots, too small to clean. The trail curved toward the east fence line, toward Karen's yard. Later that night, curiosity dragged him out again. He carried a flashlight and quietly walked the property's border. The air was still. Crickets chirped lazily. At the edge near the rear shrubs, he paused and, his beam caught a flash of something metallic, a trail cam, hidden behind a row of overgrown bushes. He hadn't installed it, which meant someone else had. And it was pointed directly at his back. The next morning, he knocked on the door of his closest neighbor, Reddy Cray, a retired Army mechanic who'd lived in Cedar Glen for over 2 decades. "Ever have problems with Karen?" Ryan asked. Eddie gave a grim chuckle. "Son, Karen's been a problem since before you had keys to that place. You give her an inch, she'll annex your yard and call it beautification." Ryan hesitated. "Did she ever mess with property lines?" Eddie's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Ryan told him about the mailbox, the survey stakes, the trail cam. Eddie's expression went flat. Then he leaned closer and said, "You ever think she's trying to scare you off that land?" Ryan didn't reply. He didn't need to, because in his gut, something clicked. This wasn't petty HOA drama anymore. It was something deeper, something territorial. The next morning, Ryan called a professional land surveyor. It was no longer about the mailbox, it was about proof. The orange flags, the trail cam, the police visits. Something told him Karen wasn't just being overzealous. She was playing a longer, dirtier game, and he was ready to flip the board. 3 days later, Travis Dillinger, a lanky, weathered surveyor with 30 years under his belt, parked his mud-caked truck beside Ryan's gravel driveway. He had sharp eyes, quiet footsteps, and a laser scanner that looked like it belonged at NASA. "You're sure the previous owner didn't have any boundary issues?" Travis asked, setting up his tripod. "I checked the deed and parcel maps. Nothing obvious. I've got Karen next door insisting my mailbox is on her easement." Travis grunted. Classic HOA misdirection. "Let's see who's really crossing lines." They spent 5 hours on the property. Travis checked corner markers, scanned the edges with GPS triangulation, and even climbed into a thorny patch at the far rear fence to access an old rusted survey pin. When he finally walked back up the porch steps, Travis was holding a tablet with a 3D model on screen. "You're gonna want to sit down for this." Ryan squinted at the graphic. His 0.4-acre parcel was highlighted in blue. But what caught his eye was the red overlay next to it, Karen's lot. "See that?" Travis said, tapping the screen. "This is where her backyard fence is. Her deck. The rose garden, even her fancy concrete patio, all of that is on your land. 18 feet deep, 60 feet wide." Ryan blinked. "You're sure?" Travis didn't even hesitate. "Down to the nail. She's been squatting on your yard for years, quietly, likely since before the last guy moved out." As the weight of it settled in, Ryan remembered something strange the seller had said during closing. "You're getting a great deal. May just ignore the HOA nonsense." He'd thought it was just about the rules. Now he saw the subtext. Someone had taken something from him and everyone else knew. "I want that in writing," Ryan said. "Jaw tight. You'll have it tomorrow. Signed, stamped, and certified." That night, he stood on the edge of his yard, flashlight in hand, scanning the fence line. On the other side, Karen's backyard glowed warmly with fairy lights. Classical music wafted through the air. She was hosting another one of her weekend wine nights guests in floral dresses and polished loafers, laughing over brie and charcuterie. All of it, every folding chair and fancy lantern, parked on his land. Ryan pulled out his phone and took pictures. Then video. Then slowly panned across the yard, making sure to capture the iron fence that wrapped around what she called her garden sanctuary. It wasn't hers anymore. Maybe it never was. As he stepped back inside, his motion-activated porch light flickered on. A shadow moved behind his fence, too fast to be an animal. His phone buzzed immediately. A text. Unknown number. "You should have left the mailbox where it was." Ryan stared at the message, then at the yard, then back at the screen. He didn't know how she got his number, or if it was even her. But one thing was now perfectly clear. Karen hadn't just called the cops to intimidate him. She did it to protect a secret, and he had just unearthed it. Ryan's kitchen table had transformed into a war room. Survey maps were spread like blueprints. A folder labeled HOA correspondence sat fat with fines, notices, and Karen's increasingly aggressive emails. He had printed every message, including the anonymous text, and backed them all up to the cloud. But what gnawed at him most wasn't the property line violation. It was how she got away with it for so long. He decided to dig deeper. The next morning, Ryan headed to City Hall. The front desk clerk, a bored man in his 50s, barely looked up when Ryan approached the window marked Public Records and Zoning. "I need historical zoning and plat filings for Parcel 1 to B. Cedar Glen Estates, and any HOA disputes or complaints from previous homeowners, especially tied to 225 Juniper Lane." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "That's a precise request." "I have a precise problem." An hour later, Ryan sat in a quiet back room with a stack of file boxes. Most of it was mundane permit approvals, fence height exceptions, gardening approvals. But in one of the older boxes, folded into a manila envelope dated 7 years ago, he found it a formal complaint. Filed by Michael Tillman, the man who'd owned Ryan's house before him. The title was blunt: Illegal Fence Construction and Property Encroachment. Ryan's pulse quickened as he read the summary. Tillman had claimed Karen, then the newly elected HOA president, had gradually shifted her back fence into his land by approximately 16 feet, citing suspicious measurements and an altered copy of the neighborhood plat she had presented to the HOA board. The file should have gone to a city zoning officer, but in red ink. Someone had scribbled withdrawn and stamped the record closed. There was no withdrawal letter. No signature from Tillman, nothing. Just gaunt. Ryan flipped through the internal routing slip. There in the lower margin, a name was printed, processed by T. Whitmore. Ryan froze. Whitmore. Same last name. Back at the front desk, he pressed. "The clerk, who's T. Whitmore?" The man glanced at an old staff directory pinned behind the glass. "Tessa Whitmore. Records assistant, left 5 years ago. Think she was Karen's niece or cousin or something?" "Why?" Ryan didn't answer. He didn't have to. It was becoming clearer by the hour. Karen hadn't just stolen land. She'd buried the proof. That night, Ryan sat on his porch with a laptop, reviewing old satellite imagery from various years using a public geographic data tool. The pattern became unmistakable. Each year, Karen's fence crept farther into his yard by inches, then feet. In one image from nearly a decade ago, the fence wasn't even there yet. Her yard had ended in a hedge line. He clicked to an image from 3 years later. A new deck appeared. Then a patio. Then the large iron fence. Every expansion happened so gradually it looked innocent, but in hindsight, was deliberate. He was still staring at the screen when his motion sensor blinked again. A shadow moved past his window. Ryan stood slowly and stepped outside, shining his flashlight across the lawn. No one, except the survey flags, were gone, all of them, ripped clean out of the ground. No footprints this time. No evidence. Just empty grass. Karen was sending a message. But Ryan wasn't backing down. She may have silenced Tillman and buried records, but he wasn't going anywhere, because this wasn't just a boundary dispute anymore. It was fraud, and he had the first thread of a tangled, rotten web. The Cedar Glen HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse every third Thursday, usually a dull affair with discussions about mulch colors and acceptable holiday lighting. But this time, word had spread. Ryan was coming with proof by 7:02 p.m. The room was full, homeowners packed into folding chairs, murmuring. Eyes flicking between Karen at the head of the table and the thick binder Ryan carried under his arm. Karen sat tall, her blazer stiff, her fake smile tighter than usual. "Let's begin with old business," she announced, avoiding Ryan's direction. "Last meeting's minutes, motion to approve." But Ryan stood, calm, direct. "Before we approve anything, I need to address an urgent legal matter involving unauthorized land use and falsified HOA documentation." Silence fell like a dropped stone. Karen's smile didn't flinch. "Mr. Mercer, if this is about your mailbox, it's about my property," Ryan cut in. "And the 18 feet of it that currently sits under your deck." A collective inhale rippled through the room. Karen laughed once, brittle. "Shh. Mr. Mercer, you're misinformed. I have a certified survey," he said, holding up the binder completed last week. "Shows clear encroachment from your lot into mine." Not only that, he flipped a tab, pulling out a copy of Tillman's withdrawn complaint. "But I discovered a buried file in city archives from the previous owner who attempted to report this same violation 7 years ago." Ryan walked to the table, slid the folder across to the HOA secretary, and turned to face the room. "It was processed and marked withdrawn by your niece, Tessa Whitmore, who was working in records at the time. No formal withdrawal was ever signed. The file just ... disappeared." Karen's face paled. Gasps echoed. A few people exchanged sharp looks. "I also have satellite evidence showing how the encroachment increased slowly over the last decade. Fence lines, decks, garden expansions, all creeping farther into what is legally Lot 1 to be." Karen stood suddenly. "This is slander. You come into this community, disrespect our rules. And now you're making baseless accusations to cover your own violations." "Then let's take it to court," Ryan replied evenly. "Because I've already filed a complaint with the county zoning board and a civil attorney is reviewing damages." The room burst into murmurs. Karen's eyes darted around. She wasn't in control anymore. "You think this changes anything?" she snapped. "The HOA will back me." That's when Eddie Craig Wyatt, dependable Eddie, stood up from the back row. "No, we won't." All heads turned. "I've lived here 22 years, he said. "I watched your fence go up. Knew it didn't seem right. But you bullied people into silence. You fined folks over paint swatches while you were stealing their land." Others started nodding. Whispers turned to complaints. "Someone said she threatened me over a flagpole," while another muttered, "She made us tear down our shed for being 6 inches too tall." Karen's hands trembled. "This meeting is out of order," she barked. "All of you sit down." But no one sat, because the lie had cracked open. Ryan watched her facade crumble. As the HOA board members agreed to suspend Karen's presidency pending investigation, she stormed out of the room, heels clicking like gunshots across the tile, outside. Her Lexus peeled out of the lot. Ryan stood under the buzzing fluorescence, binder in hand, as neighbors approached him, some apologetic. Some furious at Karen, but all finally awake, and somewhere deep inside. He knew she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, but neither was he. The lawsuit was filed the following Monday. Ryan's attorney, Relay Gaines, was a quiet powerhouse who had spent years untangling real estate fraud cases in the county. Reviewing the survey, the HOA meeting minutes, and the vanished Tillman file. She made a decision. We're not just suing for encroachment, she told Ryan, sliding a packet across the table. We're filing for fraud, nuisance, and quiet title. If we win this, Karen won't just owe you damages, she could lose her home. Ryan blinked. That's possible. If we can prove she knowingly built on your land and covered it up? With falsified records and intimidation tactics. Absolutely. Judges don't like thieves who wear HOA pins. By Wednesday, Karen was officially served, and by Thursday, her mask came off. Ryan came home late that evening to find his mailbox smashed, not knocked over, destroyed. Bent metal, broken post, letters scattered across the gravel. The wooden beam looked like it had been hit by a sledgehammer. He called the sheriff's office. They logged it, took photos, but without footage or witnesses. It was classified as vandalism of unknown origin. Except Ryan had no doubt who did it, not wanting to give her another chance. He installed motion sensor cameras around the property that night, 6 of them, overlapping coverage. No more shadow visitors. No more torn-up survey flags. Karen had gone quiet, too quiet. That made Marla suspicious. She's hiding something, she told Ryan as they prepared for the preliminary hearing. Probably scrambling to cover her tracks. There may be a false deed or altered plat somewhere we haven't found yet. Ryan nodded. Then we need to dig deeper. So they did. Marla filed a subpoena for HOA records and city filings under Karen's presidency. When the documents arrived, they found something shocking. A second plat map, different than the one recorded with the county. On this version, Karen's lot extended farther into Ryan's land, but only on paper. The forgery was clumsy once closely examined. The county version clearly showed the correct boundary, while this one was manipulated to justify the encroachment. It had been distributed at an HOA meeting 2 years ago, tucked inside a neighborhood. Newsletter titled Clarifying Lot Lines for Landscape Compliance. Ryan remembered that mailer. He hadn't paid it any attention, but now he realized it had been Karen's insurance policy, a quiet rewrite of the truth in hopes that no one would notice. Marla leaned back, tapping the edge of the forged map. This is the smoking gun. Ryan felt the tension in his chest start to loosen for the first time in weeks, until he received an email. The next morning, subject. Complaint for defamation and harassment tit was from Karen's attorney. She was countersuing, claiming emotional distress, public humiliation, loss of community standing. She wanted damages, $200,000 worth. Ryan laughed when he read it, but Marla didn't. She's not expecting to win. She's trying to scare you into settling. Classic intimidation tactic. Not a chance, Ryan said. We're too close. But it didn't stop there. That evening, a letter arrived at every house in the neighborhood. A glossy, full-color pamphlet titled The Truth, about Ryan Mercer. In it were cherry-picked photos of Ryan moving the mailbox, quotes pulled from context, and a narrative that painted him as a litigious outsider who was trying to destroy the spirit of Cedar Glen. Karen had officially gone nuclear, but this time, Ryan was ready for war. The courtroom was cold, sterile, unforgiving. Karen sat at the defendant's table, wearing an all-black pantsuit and pearls, lips pressed into a bitter line. Her lawyer, a puffed-up man with a comb-over and loud tie, whispered furiously as Judge Elkins reviewed the file. The gallery was packed, neighbors, HOA members, and even the former owner. Michael Tillman had shown up and taken a quiet seat in the back row. Ryan sat beside Marla Gaines, calm and composed. But inside, he was a storm. The stakes weren't just property lines anymore. This was about exposing everything. The first witness was Travis Dillinger, the surveyor. He laid out his process and confirmed under oath that Karen's deck, patio, and fence were well over the legal boundary 18 feet onto Ryan's land. Karen's attorney tried to discredit the survey, suggesting faulty instruments, but Travis just smirked. "I've done over 400 property line surveys, sir. Your client built a stone walkway on someone else's land. That's not a measuring error. That's theft with landscaping." Laughter rippled through the gallery. The judge tapped his gavel. Kieran's face turned red. Next came Ryan, calm and deliberate. He recounted the events from the smashed mailbox to the trail cam incident to the tampered HOA documents. But it was what Marla pulled out next that changed everything. "This," she said, handing a large poster-sized print to the court clerk, "is the forged plat map distributed to homeowners in Karen Whitmore's 2023 newsletter." She placed the original county-certified plat beside it, side by side. The fraud was undeniable. Judge Elkins studied the maps with a frown. "Ms. Whitmore, were you aware these maps conflicted?" Karen stood. She didn't answer immediately. Then, slow deliberation, she said, "I only included what the HOA approved. It wasn't my personal map. It came from the architectural committee." Marla stood instantly. "The architectural committee is you, Ms. Whitmore. You were the sole signer on the newsletter. And the HOA board minutes confirm that no vote was ever held to change the plat. You published a fraudulent map." Karen's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him off. "Sit down, Mr. Albright." Then came the moment no one saw coming. Marla brought Michael Tillman to the stand. The man, quiet and gray-haired, held a thin folder in his lap. He looked at Karen with no fear. "I filed a complaint about Karen's fence back in 2017, he said. "I was told by the city it had been withdrawn, but I never withdrew it. I moved away because she made life hell. Petty fines, anonymous complaints. She even reported my teenage son for loitering on our front steps." He opened the folder and handed Marla a copy of an email. It was from Tessa Whitmore, Karen's niece. It said, "Aunt Kay, got it processed like we talked about. File marked withdrawn. He won't be able to prove a thing now." The room went still. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. "Where did you get this?" the judge asked. Tillman shrugged. "I was going to toss it, but I never delete anything." Ryan sat still as the courtroom buzzed. Marla leaned toward him and whispered, "This, is enough for criminal inquiry." Karen's lawyer was pale now. Before the judge could even speak, Marla stood. "We rest, Your Honor." Karen had no response. Her defense fell apart in real time. Her lawyer barely asked a question during cross. Her credibility collapsed with every word Michael spoke. The judge called a recess. Karen stormed out, reporters trailing behind her, and Ryan. He sat motionless in the emptying courtroom, watching the woman who tried to bury him start to crumble in front of the whole town. But the real verdict was still coming, and Ryan knew it would be brutal. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down. Ryan stood in the same cold courtroom, hands folded, heart steady. Karen sat across the aisle, flanked by a new lawyer, her third. Her once perfect hair was grayer at the roots, her expression haggard, broken. The press had already begun circling, whispers of fraud charges swirling like vultures. Judge Elkins. Read the ruling without ceremony in the matter of Ryan Mercer v. Karen Whitmore. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is hereby ordered to remove all structures encroaching upon Mr. Mercer's property within 30 days. Additionally, the court awards $145,000 in damages for fraudulent misrepresentation, legal fees, property restoration, and emotional distress. Karen gasped aloud. Elkins wasn't finished. Furthermore, due to the falsification of HOA documentation and proven intent to deceive, this court recommends the matter be forwarded to the district attorney for criminal review. You could hear a pin drop. Karen stood up suddenly. This is a witch hunt. That land was always sit down, Ms. Whitmore, the judge snapped. You lied, you manipulated city records, and you abused your position to bully neighbors for years. You're lucky this isn't already a criminal trial. Karen collapsed into her seat. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps. Ryan didn't say much, just one line. Sometimes the mailbox isn't the problem. It's the people guarding the gate. That line would go viral later that day, but for now, he just wanted peace. 30 days later, a work crew arrived at 7 a.m. to demolish Karen's illegal patio, deck, and fencing. The job took 2 full days. Her once lavish backyard was stripped to bare earth and gravel. Neighbors watched from their porches. Some sipped coffee. Others filmed. Karen didn't show her face once. A week later, a for sale sign appeared on her front lawn. By month's end, she was gone. Not just from the HOA, but from the county. Rumors flew. Some said she moved to Florida. Others claimed she was under federal investigation for real estate fraud in 3 other developments. Ryan didn't care. He had his land. It's quiet. But one final twist came in the mail weeks later. A letter from the county recorder's office. Inside was a certified document officially restoring the title. Boundaries of Lot 1 to be his land, fully and publicly protected. Attached was a short note. Thanks to your case, we've begun auditing HOA plats submitted in the last 10 years. You've helped uncover 3 other boundary disputes with similar manipulation. Well done. Ryan smiled. It wasn't just justice. For him, Karen's downfall had opened the door for others. Later that week, the HOA held a special meeting. They voted to dissolve the existing board and restructure under a new community charter. For the first time in years. Cedar Glen wasn't ruled by threats, and Ferret was run by neighbors. And when it came time to elect a new HOA president, Ryan's name was on the ballot. He declined. I didn't fight for power, he said. I fought to stop the abuse of it. Instead, he helped start a neighborhood restoration fund for shared spaces, kids programs, and fair enforcement training. The mailbox? Still there, stronger than ever. Cemented deep, with a fresh coat of paint and a small plaque beneath. Line. Drawn, case closed, 'cause in the end, Karen had tried to bury the truth. But Ryan dug it back up and used it to bury her reign instead.